Okay. This question says characteristics of competitive markets. The model of competitive markets relies on these three core assumptions. One, there must be many buyers and sellers, and a few players can't dominate the market. Okay. Two, firms must produce an identical product. Buyers must regard all sellers' products as equivalent. And three, firms and resources must be fully mobile, allowing for free entry into and exit from the industry. The first two conditions imply that all consumers and firms are price takers, while the third is not necessary for price-taking behavior. Assume for this problem, a market cannot maintain competition in the long run without free entry. Identify whether or not each of the following scenarios describes a competitive market, along with the correct explanation of why or why not. So scenario one. Dozens of companies produce plain white socks. Consumers regard plain white socks as identical and don't care who manufactures their socks. It seems to fulfill all the criteria pretty well. First criteria is that there are many producers. Dozens would qualify as many. The second criteria is that all goods are identical, and consumers seem to treat plain white socks as completely identical and don't care who manufactures it. And finally, we're under assumption that there is free entry and exit into this market. So this first scenario seems to be a good match for our pure competition scenario. Second, in a major metropolitan area, one chain of coffee shops has gained a large market share because customers feel its coffee tastes better than that of its competitors. So it seems like this is a situation where you have a very dominant, almost monopoly. It's not a pure or complete monopoly, but you do have one chain which has a large market share and large presence. And so this violates that first tenet, which is that there's a large number of sellers, right? It's clear in this context there might be only one large chain and some other small ones. And the second thing we look at is the idea that there is differentiation between products, right? This chain of coffee has clearly differentiated itself because customers feel it has a better tasting coffee. So the coffee is not identical. People do care where they're buying coffee from, and that's why this is a violation as well. And finally, the third option is not really being considered. So this would not be a purely competitive market. Next question says, Scholastic Inc. owns the U.S. copyright to a popular book series. It is the only company with the legal right to publish these books in the series in the United States. And this seems to be a really big violation of criteria one, which is saying that there are many producers of this book. Clearly, for this book in the United States, there's only one producer, so it's a monopoly. And second, there's not really much to talk about in terms of identical products because nobody else is producing this good in the first place, so it's not going to fulfill the criteria for competition. And finally, in a small town, there are two providers of broadband internet access, a cable company and the phone company. Internet access provided by both providers is of the same speed. So we do have identical products, right? The access to the internet is the same speed, but what we don't have is a wide variety of producers. We only have two, right? And so this would violate that first criteria of having many sellers, and so this would not be pure competition. And finally, for broadband internet access, it requires a lot of hardware and a lot of infrastructure to support that. So I would also say that there is going to be high barriers to entry into this market in terms of that initial upfront investment into that infrastructure. So this is not going to be the case. Okay, so let's go down the line and compare it to the previous year's answers. So the first case is the socks case, and we said it was pure competition. And the previous year agrees, and they say this is a case of perfect competition because the products sold are identical. The second case was the coffee case, and they said no, because in this case one product is considered superior, so thus the coffee is not identical, and we agree there. 3 says there is only one firm that has a copyright, and we said that this is a monopoly, it's not a competitive market, and they agreed. And finally, 4, the internet access, they said yes, because the products are identical. The sellers are a small number, but it's nowhere mentioned that entry is restricted. So I would push back on this because I don't believe that identical products are going to be a really good justification for this classification. I would say this is not a competitive market. There's only 2 producers in this market, so it's oligopoly, not purely competitive. although nothing is specifically mentioned to say that entry is restricted, we can infer that the high upfront infrastructure costs to set up for setting up broadband access would be a high barrier to entry into this market. So we push back on that question, but the other ones we are going to agree on, but we'll mark this as incorrect.